Welcome to Separate Together, a podcast exploring what happens when we change not just how families separate, but how we think about legal separations altogether. Hosted by me, practicing family lawyer Melissa Bourgeois.
And by me, definitely not a lawyer, Cody Dub.
And just a quick disclaimer, we like to remind our listeners that this podcast should not be taken as legal advice and it is for informational purposes only. Because everyone's relationship is different, please consult a legal professional if you have any questions.
Hello, how are you?
I'm well, how are you?
I'm good. I'm good.
Staying warm?
No, of course not. I'm freezing. I'm perpetually cold. I'll be cold for the next 4 months.
Okay.
But you can ask me every time if I'm staying warm. But today I am excited because we're doing an episode that I have wanted to do for a very long time.
Okay.
Which is when we follow up with our clients a year later to actually sign their divorce documents. So most people, myself included, I'll count myself in that camp, don't know that when you are divorcing or separating, most of the time, maybe not most of the time, but a lot of the time, you will work with your lawyer, in our instance, your one lawyer, to generate your separation agreement. And then the vast majority of our clients usually kind of do that work and then they go and then they come back to us, about a year later to actually file their divorce documents. So we are in this incredibly unique position of doing a lot of intense kind of emotional work, problem solving work with our clients, and then sending them out on their merry way. And then we get to check in with them a year later and kind of see how it's gone.
Yeah, which is really, really neat. I always say, I'm not leaving you here indefinitely, but you're probably not going to need me or need to talk to me for, most of them, it's about 6-8 months, right, between the time that they've separated and whatnot. And most of the time that rings true. Rarely do we have them come back during that time to say, hey, I need to talk to Melissa about this, because again, they've put the whole framework together. So after they sign their separation agreement, I'm like, well, now's the time for you to just, take this and take your time to do your healing work or whatever it is you need to do and to get into your new normal. And we'll see you in a year.
Yeah.
So back they come. Yeah.
And so for people who don't know or who have maybe never done this before, in Canada, you need to give a reason as to why you're divorcing. And it's 3 reasons, right? Please let me not absolutely bungle this on this platform. But it's adultery, physical or emotional abuse, cruelty, or living separately for a year. Obviously, we serve amicable clients, so for the vast, if not almost completely majority of our clients, that is that they've been living separately for a year.
Yeah, those grounds, the first 2 that you spoke to, don't apply in the stream that we use in the courts, which is the joint statement of claim and the joint request. So all it is the 1-year separation mark has to elapse. What's interesting is it says separate and apart, but some people actually, we had one the other day, they renegotiated some kind of roommate agreement. So they signed their separation agreement, divided all their property, divided their bank accounts, everything, and then we're like, yeah, you know what, market's not really that great, and can I just stay in the basement for a while? And so they came to their signatures together, which was really, really fun. So it's really the spectrum of what are we going to get? So what we do in our office, and I always tell them this at the time, is okay, after you've signed your separation agreement, our paralegal will diarize the date of separation and we'll be in touch with you a couple weeks before, just to see if you are both prepared for the filing of the joint divorce judgment and if there's any kind of tweaks or adjustments. So maybe that 1 year has meant that another child support variation has come into place, right? Because you adjust child support every year. So they're like, well, instead of paying $253, I'm paying $282 or whatever, right? But most of the time, I would say 90% of the time, most people are really, really ready. And we've had a few that have ghosted us, which is totally also fine. They're just not ready to file the actual paperwork. They obviously are living their lives, being their family without, needing the final divorce papers. And so they just, either respond, yeah, we'll get back to you later, or not at all. And that's also okay. But I think what you're alluding to is, the transformation as to, the moment they, walk in for their first meeting with us versus the change in the individuals when they come in to sign.
Yeah. And I mean, it feels like a journey for me, and I have such a minimal part in it. But, a lot of the times, I'm the first call. And so I'm the first professional that they've kind of reached out to, and just the trepidation, the anxiety, the dread, the emotion, the uncertainty. It's an enormous experience. And then obviously I'm our number one fan. I have such faith in our process. I'm in awe of you and your capacity for all of this. But I have kind of the inside track. So I know I'm just get to your first meeting with Melissa. Once they do their consultations, it's I can just see their shoulders lowering incrementally. First, when they consult with you and they kind of get a sense of like, oh, we're going to be able to do this the way we want. This is a good option for us. Like, I see a light at the end of the tunnel, and then just how easy we make things for them in terms of disclosure and in terms of like streamlining the process and laying out the steps of what this is going to entail. And then they have their first meeting with you and they're like, I get it. I know what we're going to do. The semblance of a plan is coming together. We understand now what we have to talk about. We're confident in talking about it with each other. We're going to put these plans in place. Or, a lot of our clients too come with plans and they're like, we can do this. We've talked about this. We've gotten the validation that we're on the right track. We're going in the right direction. This is going to work. This is going to happen. And then they execute these plans. And it's fascinating to me to see the like full spectrum of emotion in this relatively very short period of time. I think our clients are always shocked when I tell them our turnaround time for a separation agreement, obviously not the divorce like we said, but the separation agreement is like between 2 and 6 weeks. And they're like, what? We're going to be done? And I'm like, well, you're never done. You're co-parenting, like but you're going to be done in about 2 to 6 weeks. And that's really fast.
Yeah, like you're implementing your new life plan at that point. And as I said, like the neat part is they go and they do that work. It's not, okay, well, Melissa didn't think about this, so now we've encountered this problem, we're going to need to meet with her again. But because their foundation is so strong, and that's what I pride myself in, is my point here is to help you set the foundation. You're going to build the framework from here together. You don't need me because you didn't really need lawyers involved in your family before, right? So now that you have this plan and you know how the legal stuff works. And I think from my own anecdotal experience of watching so many, I've had now the privilege of, probably thousands of clients at this point, like through the course of my career, but the quicker that you can get the legal stuff set up, the quicker you can start to move on and do that internal work that you need, right? Even the grieving but when you're still mired in it and you're not sure what the outcome's going to be, anything is still possible at that point, right? So, okay, well, maybe today you're agreeing to this for spousal support, but you still could change your mind, or you agreed to that spousal, but then I want something different in property. And that also kind of stops people from being able to do their individual work afterwards, which is working through the process of grieving that relationship, but also rebuilding that relationship, kind of new boundaries, new ways of being, that kind of thing. So that year is kind of this, like, again, because we're just like, where did they go? Or like their names would pop up in our systems and I'm like, oh, I wonder like what it's going to be like for them, right? So, some of them still are in super tight contact. And so they'll be like, can we meet up for lunch afterwards or whatever? Or other ones, they share like, you've seen them, physical transformations, or they're newly in love with somebody else, or they've traveled, or they, all kinds of really neat stories. But what is so kind of obvious is like that the joy that's coming through them. And no longer are they governed by the fear of the unknown. They've embraced the unknown and they feel so much stronger because they've been courageous enough to be like, okay, I took on probably one of the biggest life events of life and I've survived it. And not only did I survive it, I'm thriving through it. And like, kudos to them. It's just, we all love it when we get to catch up. I'm just like, oh, I wonder what they're going to share with me now, right?
Yeah. So. And I think it's, it's the proof of a well-laid plan is like, there really is when you're not, we talk a lot about the differences between our approach here versus the traditional system, but what we see and is shocking to me is just not what you hear in the narrative around divorce. Nope. Like the fact that we have our clients come in a year later and exactly like you said, some of them are repartnered, some of them are pregnant, some they've changed careers with twins. Yeah, they are moving on in a really healthy, really interesting, really exciting way. And that excitement is palpable to them, to us. It's just a totally different vibe versus, and you can speak to this more, I can't, but like in the traditional system where, your separation could take anywhere from 3 to 7 years and you are gaining no ground, you are losing ground, and you are losing money and you are losing hope.
Well, and most of the time you come to the end out of resignation and not choice, right? Yeah. So it's just like, I give up this, I can't do this anymore. But this is very much like, okay, I'm choosing this outcome for myself. And not only am I choosing it for me, I'm choosing it for you, I'm choosing it for our kids, I'm choosing it for our parents, I'm choosing it for our family and friends, right? So all of that makes so much difference. And I think what sets us apart is not just the one lawyer thing. Like, of course, that neutralizing the language and having your expert, neutral, impartial lawyer there to give you information and empower you to make those choices. But what it is we're also helping you set up a life plan. And lawyering traditionally doesn't do that. And it's just by virtue, it was more transactional, I think, right? But now it's like, okay, yeah, we took that really objective, hard look at your finances 8 months ago. And boy, that was a rough truth to just be like, I'm going to have to scrimp and save. And, now I don't really have this car that I really wanted because I can't afford it. But what it is taking ownership of, this is my life. This is the plan that I'm laying forward for it. And so not all of them are even still in contact with each other. I'm not saying they all remained best friends and, that's not it, but they don't have that animosity or that question mark of the unknown and what it's going to bring to them. And then therefore it allows them to just really start to embrace their new life as soon as possible. And like I said, they're so cool at it. It's really neat to see what they're becoming and, and then to see some of them, like they'll bring their new person in and, that new love, that fresh love, but it isn't something that they have to hide or they have to kind of, diminish because they don't quite, like, I'm not quite done my divorce. So part of our relationship is you helping me through my divorce. Like, it's not like that. It's like, oh, and then I met this like eligible bachelor and boy is he like, and then off they go. Right. So that's the neat part. And then just I think for me, what is also really cool is when they're sharing their stories about how glad they are that their kids are okay. Right.
Yeah.
And that part of it, like they're so proud that they've maneuvered through it and they kept their promise that their kids are, and then they'll share, like so-and-so was on a roll at this, or like, I had to drive to 6 different cities for hockey, but, now she's going to be in the elite team. And, all of these really cool things that in my old practice, it was a lot more like pain or like, again, like I said, resignation, like, fine, this has happened to me and I guess I'll just sign this document. I don't like it. It's fine. I didn't get my voice heard. The judge didn't seem to acknowledge any of my pain or my suffering or any of those things, but I guess like this is as good as it gets. And it's just not the same for our clients. Like, again, because they took the opportunity to use it as a growth platform and to then just acknowledge their part of it.
Yeah, I think that's like, I really feel I'm centering myself in this conversation that has very little to do with me, but
yeah, it absolutely does.
Yeah. But I think it's funny for me because like I work across our Instagram, and our TikTok, and now you and I do this podcast. And so much of our Instagram is like me boiling down what we're talking about on this podcast to like 2 or 3 sentences. And they seem really trite. You know what I mean? Like, because it's a post. Like, I don't even know who's scrolling or who's listening to it. But like, the idea of like, use this as an opportunity to transform sounds really dumb sometimes because you're like, okay, thanks.
Yeah.
But I cannot express to people who might be listening to this just how true it is, how much can change for you in a year. We see it, and like we do a lot of couples, like we do a lot of business. I don't know how that comes across, but like for better or for worse, we do a lot of amicable divorce. And I am here to tell you the transformation in under a year is unbelievable. And I don't think you hear that often. Like you just don't get, when you hear people talking about divorce or when you hear people talking about their own separations, they're really in the thick of it. They are really emotionally overwhelmed. They are stressed to the max. They are making, exactly like you've said before, more decisions than they've ever had to make in their entire lives, and these are decisions with massive consequences. There are children involved, there are other people involved, their parents are involved. This is a tough time, but you don't always get to hear them talking about it a year later. And I don't think people understand just how monumental the way the separation happens is, and what taking ownership, all of those very trite, isms or aphorisms, implementing them, just how substantial it actually is.
Yeah. Well, and never mind the amount of conscious energy that it takes to play ping pong back and forth, back and forth, back and forth for an endless period of time. Like, again, it's not like you're just like, okay, well, after 6 court appearances, terms will be established. It's like, no, that's not the way that it is. So you're always constantly playing not only a game of action, but a reaction all the time, right? But, again, there are some people when they're signing their separation agreements that are really consciously taking to, we're very careful to frame this in, these people took the needs of their family as a whole into consideration. In doing that, they have come to conclude what is fair and reasonable for them, which I don't have that authority to deem what that is. They come to that own conclusion. But some of them will very much, like, they're disgruntled and they're like, this isn't what I wanted, and I thought I was going to get a larger spousal support award, or I thought that my right to this was going to be, or I gave up too much, I think, in my opinion. And sometimes I I have to take that very carefully, and because again, like, this is your agreement, so we need to make sure that, but what they recognize is the cost of pursuit. They're like, I don't like this, but I also know what the cost of finalizing this means, of knowing the outcome, of owning the outcome, and knowing that it's not just me in this equation. And I think the traditional way that we have clients set up is like, it's only about you, so get the best for you. But when I remind them of like, the best negotiated agreement is that you come out of this both a little bit unhappy, that's because one didn't win at the cost of the other. It's because you adulted through it and you took into consideration what it was going to mean to you. And sometimes you do. You're like, I value that so much though, that we need to bring this up, right? And I don't think it's right. And I do. And then the other one will listen and they'll be like, yeah, okay, right? And they'll meet them in the middle. And so in that, that's why I say, like, the recidivism of our separation agreements, they're not coming back to be like, well, you didn't fill that variable in, because they're filling in their own variables. Right. Yeah. And they're owning it. I'm so proud of them when they do that. I'm just like, yeah, sorry. Right. Like, that's
sucks.
That sucks. But you're right, because you're not going to spend the next 6 months going back and forth, or halting this process because you need more time to talk to a bunch of other lawyers that are going to just fill your head with what your best case is, instead of just acknowledging, okay, interdependence over time meant this to us, and this is how we're going to be able to move forward. So again, just that timeliness. It's not that we rush them through. Some people do take a pause. That is absolutely entirely appropriate for some situations. But for the most part, that finality of like, and then the owning that document, I'm like, it's your contract. Like, it only will come back into your life again if one of you chooses to break the terms of the contract, that you will then have to explain, oh, well, I did sign that. And I know I had to give up certain things to be able to get other things. That's what this is. That's what legal separation literally is. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's always been one of the most interesting parts to me. You know, a question that I get a lot, and you and I talk about this often, is like, you know, people be like, well, what are the consequences? What are the consequences? And I'm like, what do you mean? Like, what do you mean by consequences? And they mean like, if you don't pay your child support, or if you don't drop them off at the time that we have listed, or if something happens and they stay with you an extra night, like, and sometimes they genuinely mean like, will the police be knocking at their door? And I'm like, no, absolutely. Like, this is your agreement. And it's like, you kind of have to get into the weeds a little bit about like, what is a good faith agreement? Like, you have the power in that, is that you have decided, and that you are both beholden to it equally. And as much as you've put into it is what you're going to get out of it. And for some people that can be a really kind of scary thing. But for our clients, at least, and for most people, it's an incredibly powerful thing. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of like, it's this almost like really, you know, beautiful opportunity to introduce balance into a relationship where it's felt like that might have been missing for a long time. Like, all of the kind of areas where you might feel, you know, if I take my own relationship where I haven't been fiscally contributing, but I've been domestically doing the lion's share of the work, the conversations that our clients are having, and that like genuinely since I've started working here, that I am now having with my own spouse, is like, these are opportunities, you know, when you're having these conversations, to reintroduce balance, because you have those shared interests in being okay on the other side. And it's really fascinating to me when they do ask, you know, like, well, what happens? And I'm like, well, let's follow that line. Like, what does happen? Are you going to call the police, or are you going to call your person and have a conversation, say, hey, what happened? You know, okay, you know, you're late, or this time clearly doesn't work for you. You're not able to do drop off at this time. Something shifted in your schedule, or the arena is too far away. I'll do this. I'll move on this side. And I'm like, the consequences are that you continue to co-parent successfully. Those are the consequences. The police are not coming. Like, Melissa's not going to knock on your door and say, hey, like, we talked about this.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, and you touched on it a little bit, but it's, you know, creating and taking your power within a process that I think traditionally has tended to say you are powerless, right? It has to be this way. And I'm very candid about the limits of the law. Like, yes, there's a framework and we have to abide between certain things. But when they're looking to me for an answer on such things as like, what is the appropriate spousal support here? the best I can remind them is that even a judge would have a hard time figuring out how that is. And you are the only two who have, just to your point in your marriage, like, you know those contributions, you know what it's worth, and you also know what you're hoping the other person has as an outcome so that your kids are also okay in their home, that kind of thing, right? So again, we tend to think that the legal system is just going to take away our power and then, you know, they're going to govern us into place, and it just simply isn't that. And once I sign their divorce documents with them, and I'm like, well, you know, no judge is knocking on your door next year to make sure that you've done the child support review, so you return to be self-governing, right?
Yeah.
And yeah.
But I feel like that's an interesting, like, as you were talking about it, you know, and God, we'll see if this point makes any semblance of sense, but it's an interesting thing because people refer to the legal system and navigating the legal system, and you forget that the legal system is in fact just people. It's your lawyer who is a person, you know, it's a judge who is a person with their own biases, with their own perspective, you know, with their own career, and who exists in this legal system. And you are two people navigating it, with two children navigating it. So it's a system which dehumanizes it, but the actual system is just composed of people, like of humans,
right? And there's so many permutations of them, right? Like, what one size does not fit all, it can't, right? And you don't parent the same way that your best friend parents or your cousin parents or any of those types of things. So then to think that, you know, we're going to have this puzzle piece and it's like, oh, you're family A, okay, there you go, here's the prescription. And sometimes I do see it in them where they're just like wide-eyed and they're like, what do you mean you're not going to tell us the answer? And I'm like, I've given you the information, right? And then that's where that adulting comes in, where it's just like, okay, God darn it, we are going to have to. And, you know, there's been a few that we're like, are they going to get there? You know, and the most amazing thing happens is that they'll call each other up, and they're the ones who, you know, some of them, they don't want to call each other. Like, they're just like, no, I'd rather Cody, just you coordinate this. But they'll call each other because they know that the only other person that knows is that other one. And they'll have that very candid conversation. Then they come back with their terms and they're like, don't love this, but they sign it. And then I'm like, okay, see you later, we'll see you in a year. And then they come back, and that's when the magic sauce happens, and you're like, remember when you didn't like that, right? And they're able to objectively, so many of them say, like, but I recognize that was for the best for both of us, right? That was the best outcome we could have brokered. No regrets, right?
Because I think you know, what I notice happening too is like when our clients do get a little bit stuck, and of course it happens. I understand exactly why it happens. When they do get a little bit stuck is when I start having kind of individual conversations with them, and like very quickly the layer of reality gets laid over top as our conversations kind of devolve into like appliances, and they're talking to me and I'm like talking to them, and I'm like, you know,
you're like, do you remind them of the Beanie Baby meme where this like, it's like,
and like I'm like writing it down, like I'm like microwave, and they can kind of hear me and they're like, you know what, I'm going to call him, and I'll just like, I'll talk to him, and I'm like, because what am I going to, like, I'll write it down, like I'll send him, you know, I'm happy to kind of chat with you about this because I'm not your lawyer, but almost instantly they're kind of like, this is dumb. You know what? Let me get back to you when we've had a chat about this. And I'm like, absolutely. And then they really do. Yeah. And I think that's what you've always talked about. What was missing before is so many times when you were in, you know, a traditional practice or litigated practice, you just kind of wish you could like call a timeout and say, can you guys just go to a Tim Hortons, sit down, talk about these 3 things, and then come back when we're not racking up the billable hour listening to you, you know, talk about the microwave. Like, just go take a time out and then come back and we'll resume. But you can't do that.
Yeah, no, because in that process, you have to be oppositional for the sake of being oppositional. And if you cede any kind of, you know, ground, then all of a sudden, well, I mean, if you give up the microwave, what's next? You're going to give up your entire pension? And you're like, what? Like, how did we end up in Extremistan, right? But that's the thing. And then that's also why, again, when it's set and defined and you are able to just be like, I don't love this, but I'm going to accept that this is the outcome that I, as a fully formed adult, have decided is the best that I could do with the information. There's an ownership of it and an acceptance of it. And I mean, you know me, like I'm a bit more of a spiritualist, and so I'm like, just trust that the rest will come back to you in some other way. And then they're like, you know what? My great aunt so-and-so left me $20,000 and I'd never heard of her. And like, oh my gosh. And you know, like all of these good things, because you're open to the goodness. You're not closing your heart being like, okay, I'm at war now now and I just have to preserve everything just for me, right? And that makes such a big difference. Like, you know, a year later, some of them, as I said, like they'll come in and they make it an opportunity where then afterwards they're like, well, we're going, because we've got this lovely little bakery down the street and we're going there together to kind of like, you know, not celebrate this, but share this moment together. It brings that finality to them. And it also, I think what they're really grateful for is they know that we're tying up all of the loose ends. So any other little orders that they need, or just making sure the land got transferred properly, like just, you know, those little things that they don't have to necessarily be worried about. And then just that curiosity that we have where I'm like, yeah, so where are you in life? Like, what's going on? And they're just so open to sharing. And you're right, that vast difference from the first time when they're all really kind of, even the easiest ones, but, you know, the ones that are like, it's pretty well defined, this is it. But they're still afraid that maybe I'm going to launch some kind of grenade into the equation and like, you know, all of a sudden they're going to end up in something. But once it's all said and done, then they're able to just start to look at that new life and they are able to embrace it with so much just gusto. And that's the neatest part.
Yeah, and then I take that and I boil it down to something like the power of being done.
Right? Yeah. Something like that. And yeah, that'll be the Instagram post for this.
Yeah, and you all better go and like it.
Well, yeah, but like, no, but just the power of owning your own life, right? In the legal system, that isn't something. You have your advocate, and your advocate's going to decide for you, and your advocate's going to plan your life out for you. And that disillusionment is often the hardest one to have, you know, to face my own clients in the traditional way and to be like, I'm sorry. And they're like, well, why didn't you think of that? And you're like, well, I couldn't have possibly imagined that would be like a variance that this particular file would take. But in this one, it is that like, I'm going to advocate for myself, but I'm also going to advocate for my family. And I think that is, you know, the most important thing is that they're like, yeah, you're my team, right? You're my team. And I remember that, like, even in the traditional way where, you know, the point is to bash the other person and, you know, bring them down and whatever. And every once in a while I'd catch the couple looking at each other or looking at me and being like, hey, man, that was my person. Like, he's not the idiot that you're making him out to be. Like, I wasn't married to an idiot for 10 years. And like, now I'm kind of like, right. But you can't show that. So then you're just like, okay, keep treating him. And you're like, but that's not actually the truth, and nor is it actually what I want you to be doing. But we're in this process that makes it so that it's so, instead of being like, hey, congrats, you two did, and again, I'm very sincere in that, you did an incredible job at doing some really tough work, right? Because not all of it is sunshine and rainbows, and sometimes they're surprised, right? Because there's one moment that we're laughing and then the next there's tears that come out, and all of it is acceptable. But then you walk out, you've got your separation agreement, one of you moves out, you know, get to decorate your room the way that you've always wanted it to be, you know, like whatever, maybe gone on a few travels or whatever it is, right? And like, that's the neatest part.
Yeah, that, and I think, you know, you nailed it earlier on when you said like the overwhelming sentiment of our couples who come back a year later is that like, yeah, our kids are all right. We succeeded in what we set out to do, which was to divorce amicably and to make sure everybody was okay on the other side. And in most instances, everybody is more than okay.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for listening to today's episode of Separate Together.
If you like what you hear or think someone else might, please rate and review us and tell your friends to tune in. You can find us at onefamily.law.